Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowden Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our special guest today, Liberal MNA, Jacques-Cartier riding on the West Island, Greg Kelley. Greg, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron.
So, of course, we're here today to talk Super Bowl. So, no, we'll get to that at the end, because that's all we've done for the last 10 minutes off camera. We're here to talk about, obviously, what's gone on over the past couple of months. It's hard to believe it's only been a couple of months. It seems like it's dragged on forever. Your wife, Marwah Rizqy, of course, we know the whole situation there, and I don't want to dwell on that because I realize there's only so much you can talk about. But let's talk about you. This has been a rough time for you as well, going through this. So my first question, and I asked you this the first time we spoke, how you doing?
Yeah, so, a pretty simple question that often we pass off by saying, I'm hanging in there. But what does hanging in there kind of actually mean? And there's no doubt that the last couple of months has been extremely hard on myself. And as we talked about, Aaron, I'm somebody in my life that has suffered from, mental health issues. I've struggled with anxiety and depression since university, on and off. I just have. And I know where I am in my life. I come from, I have a loving family, beautiful boys. I am the son of a former MNA. I have live in a great community, house, all that. I have so many positive things. And I still on occasion suffer and have those moments of anxiety, depression, where I'm just down. And I had suffered in 2022, 2023, a professional burnout. And that happened after my wife, Marwah, had received some very serious death threats that were taken very seriously by the police. And at the same time, we just had a new boy, and I wasn't sleeping very much. And I hit a point, I just hit a wall. And I was completely exhausted on all levels, mentally just not there. And I had to take a break, go see a psychologist, go see the family doctor. So obviously when this crisis hit, which kind of came out of nowhere, it was intense, the emotions were high, it was super stressful on the family. I started to feel those symptoms of a burnout, of anxiety, depression coming back. And I really didn't want to find myself in that hole, so I took the that black hole that we like to say of despair. So I started to take the steps necessary to put myself back on track to keep my mental health in check. So over that period of time, it was hard. I was feeling the amount of emotions that were going through me. I was doing my best to support my wife, be there for my kids, at the same time having to handle the situation that was going on a day-to-day basis. It was overwhelming is the word I can use to describe what I was feeling. And I knew that this, was going to continue to go on. But in order to take care of my family and the people I love and my constituents, my community, I have to take care of myself first. If I'm not functioning well, I can't do all those other parts. So I am doing better now. I'm feeling better now. Being back in Quebec City, getting into the groove of things has definitely been helpful. But it was just straight up a very difficult and one of the worst periods of my life.
It's very, very rare politicians come out like you did, and I can't even recall the last time I heard anybody so frank and candid about what they went through. And it must have been a very difficult decision for you to be able to just speak about this publicly, because politicians have this armor around them.
And one of the the reasons I knew obviously I was going to have to speak about coming back and what I had experienced, and I always try my best to be as upfront and honest with people. And I said, this is the time maybe to share my story, something that I was very hesitant to just do because there is some stigma around it, and in general, it's just something very personal that you don't necessarily want to always share with people. But I said, I'm going to have to talk about this, but I should talk about it. I came to that conclusion too, because there's, especially for men, we don't talk about it. This week, it's Suicide Prevention Week, and we had the organization at the National Assembly. They set up a kiosk in the main hallway of the National Assembly, a booth, and they hand out and they talk to anyone who's at the National Assembly, elected officials, people are visiting. And I went by to see them, and they were just talking to me and saying, Mr. Kelley, we heard you on the radio, and thank you for what you said. And it's important because the suicide rates, we look at, men are the ones who are more likely to commit suicide versus women. There is a real mental health struggle and issue amongst men, and we don't necessarily talk about it all that much. So, on that point, I wanted to launch a message I wanted to speak towards men that we can talk about it and it's important. And I've said this a few times. If in your life you ever think, do I need to go see someone to talk about how I'm feeling mentally? The answer is yes, you do. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's your health. And I think the thing that I learned the most the first time around when I experienced a real burnout and the first time I ever started having panic attacks is that when I was feeling better and I took the step back, I realized how sick I was. And I mean, not just in between the ears, but physically. Your nervous system is so clenched up. No matter how much you sleep, you take a nap, you're never rested. You're always exhausted. Your battery is just so low and it never recharges. I personally get like stomach acid, tension in my stomach. Like I have a hard time eating certain foods. Another thing too, for sure, that I find is like my muscles and back. Like there's physical conditions that come from your mental state not being great. And when I took that break and after I got better, I said, man, I really was like every day I was waking up and feeling like crap, and that's not okay, and it's not normal. So yeah, I took the opportunity to talk all about that, and I know that we can have a discussion about access to mental health services. Not easy, not everyone has a family doctor, but there are resources in the community that exist, community organizations on the ground that deal with mental health. If you know a nurse, social worker, there are points of entry to start. And seeing someone and talking about it and getting some professional advice is the first step. Because after that, a lot of it is on your own, building practices to become better at managing your mental health, your anxiety, your depression, your sleep habits, whatever it may be. There's a long list of things people can suffer from when it comes to mental health. So
I'm curious though, how long did it take you? Because to hear this, people listening are thinking, you know what, I understand what he's saying. I've maybe gone through something like this. To get to the point where you realize I need to do something about this. Did someone come to you and say, Greg, you need to do something? When did that realization happen?
So the first time when I was in university and I started to have some panic attacks, I was so hesitant to tell anyone what I was experiencing because I actually thought I was losing my mind. I was like, they're going to end up putting me into like a hospital. Like I was like, I don't ever want to do that. And then finally when I spoke to my mom and I told her what was going on, and we made an appointment quickly with the doctor. The moment though that they told me, and so it took me a while, like I was really hiding it from everyone, not talking about it. It was probably pretty obvious to people around me at the time, but the second I spoke to a doctor and they explained to me what was going on, weight of the world off my shoulders and saying, well, at least, and because the doctor said, you're not alone. A lot of people experience this. And that kind of reassured me. For the burnout, that took a long time. Even Marwah at times mentioned, like, Greg, are you sure you're okay? I was being very stubborn, saying, I'll be okay, I'll push through this. I'm just a new dad and I don't, don't worry about it. But then at one point it was just my inside. I knew I had to go back and get some help and I had to stop what I was doing because I just couldn't keep going forward and I didn't know how it was going to end. And as I was just more afraid, like, am I just going to keep feeling worse? And I said, I can't keep doing this. So even after on a second time around, I wasn't having panic attacks, but it still took me a while to actually go and see someone to talk about what it was.
It's interesting because we've had you on before, and you've always come across as very even-tempered, chill, dare I say, on a lot of levels for a politician. I never, ever would have suspected. I mean,
but that's just it, right? It's the never would have ever suspected.
And I've heard you, and we spoke. And it's just I found it very interesting. What I also found interesting was. You must have been apprehensive on a certain level, I mean, as a politician, and yet you got a lot of support from all MNAs, not just Liberals.
Yeah, so to answer two of your questions there, apprehensive, for sure, just because, like, there are still people who say, you have it great, Greg, and you have nothing to, complain about. There, a little bit of that you kind of feel, but at the same time, I'm like, that's the point, though, is that despite having all these great things in my life, I can still feel like that. And I think that's an important message to pass along. And I did get tons of support from people at the National Assembly, which was extremely helpful. So on those fronts, it was reassuring, recomforting, and I knew I got a lot of support from the community everywhere I went. People saying thanks for speaking out. The amount of people that wrote to me on social media that I don't know. And a lot of them are men saying, thanks for, I feel I went through what you went through, and I'm happy somebody else spoke about it because there's still sort of a stigma around it. And also I can just see my circle of friends and people around me, more and more men who hit the wall. and then they realize like I shouldn't have let myself get to that point, and then something bad happens in their life, and they have to start taking steps back. So on those fronts, it was necessary, I think, in the role that I have too, to also use my voice to speak up. And I am a pretty even keel person, though. Yeah. That's the other thing too, is that what you
not
hear
exactly
on the radio,
mercurial,
but on the inside, I'm kind of a stoic person, but on the inside, I do have. I'm a pretty empathetic person, and when you see a lot of what's going on in the world, sometimes that can, you feel the pain of other people. That can be tough. I'm extremely caring. I really, truly enjoy people. So sometimes you get a lot of that, especially in our profession. You feel a lot of that emotion from other people and the struggles people are going through, and that can be tough. But in general, I'm a pretty, try to be an easygoing person. It's not an act; it's just who I am. But on the inside, I can definitely have a lot of turmoil going on.
So you get to the point now where you've dealt with this, you've been through it.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Did you come out of this where you want to have come out of this? Is this where you need to be now?
It is where I need to be now, and remaining vigilant. And I remember when I actually had my first burnout, the one thing that the psychologist told me was that you have to kind of always be prudent for a couple of years afterwards, because what your system went through, it's not damaged, but it's sort of vulnerable, I guess is the best way to say. So you just sort of have to keep an eye on it going forward. So I'm in a better place, but at the same time, it's just, you got to be vigilant that you don't, slip into some, bad habits. For me, I really got to make sure I exercise, daily, get a moment to just kind of go and take a break, take Zen moments. I mean, I do a lot of stretches, kind of like a yoga session when I can. Most of that's for my back too. Just I do so much sitting as an M&A and work, and I write in a journal to see just what I'm feeling and what's going on, and that helps. Also, speaking about how you're feeling, not to anyone but into writing, putting it into writing, helps a lot too, and especially when you're consistent with it.
I would guess that the situation might have been really exacerbated with the whole issue with your wife, Marwah, and the issues with the party and being put out of the party, and you're in the party. I mean that, but yet, how did you deal with that?
So, being in that moment, of course, being in my wife's corner, family before everything was the priority.
Right.
So I was focusing on her, and standing with her, and of course, seeing what was happening in the press was not easy, and you would get very frustrated some days, straight out angry. At the same time, support from friends around that caucus table was real, and I've been there now for 7 years, so I've been sitting with some of these people for 7 years. They're not just colleagues; they're my friends, and I can go down the list. And even people who've been elected recently, growing close to them. One thing aside of politics, for people to understand, when we're in session, I see my colleagues more than I see my family, and more than my boys. This week, I was with Philomena Roti. We were sitting together on a piece of legislation. We were together from 8:00 in the morning till 7:00 at night, together next to each other, just sitting there talking about deregulation, and those are our weeks as MNAs. That's just how we live it. So those people are colleagues, but they're also people that I consider friends. So had that support, and then also in the community. I mean, everyone was pretty. Greg, we understand what you guys are going through. Take the kids out to the Biodome on the weekend, go to the Metro, the local grocery store. People coming to see Marwah and myself, just reassuring us we support you. It's difficult, but keep going at it. This shall pass too was a message we got from a lot of people, and we want you to go back to Quebec City and doing the hard work that you do and the good honest work that you're doing. So that also, all those combination of factors, very tough moment, but you had some positive reinforcement too around you, and of course from my family and friends, it was extremely important.
Part of the issue here, and I certainly didn't know this until you told me this, which was how you found this all out. When Marwah found out, when we all found out about what had happened, you both found this out through the media.
Yeah. I mean, expulsion from the caucus, it was something that learned watching, hearing on the news, and that was very frustrating and made us obviously quite upset. I was very angry. Marwah's been a liberal her whole life, worked hard for the party. So there's no other word to say other than it was, I was extremely upset by how that was done. And after that, it was sort of just, well, where do you go from here? And then the rest of the series of events took place, and it was just a very, very strange day, something I'll never forget the rest of my life.
You know, what's
Pablo
interesting
Rodriguez
too, though-
said that he spoke to you soon afterwards, and you assured him that you were okay with the party, or that's what he said, or something.
Yeah, I mean,
like that.
I don't want to go too much into it. He did text me on 2 occasions throughout that, and I just sent me some messages. And at that point in time, I said, "Thank you for reaching out," and I left it at that because I was, I didn't know what else to do or where else to go in that moment, so I kept it very simple.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen. What's this like at home? I mean, I don't want to try to imagine what it's like, but you're married to a politician. Bad enough if you want to look at it that way in terms of, oh my God, we have to discuss this every day at the dinner table. But having gone through this for what you were battling with and what now is she having to contend with, what's that been like?
Our marriage is stronger than ever in some ways, and this has brought us as close together as you possibly could be. We have each other's backs. We're standing by one another. Marwah has always been a very good guide and advisor to me in life and, of course, in my profession. So, of course, going through this, and one of the at least more difficult parts is that a lot of this she's doing on her own, and there's sort of been a wall. She said, "Greg, I've been protecting you from yourself." Yeah. And so I've kind of she's been out speaking with her lawyers, dealing with the lawsuit and all that, and I've just been doing my best to assure her that I'm taking care of the boys as much as possible. I'm, I cook anyways at home all the time, but, continue to do those things, make sure the boys are fed in the morning and, prepare the meals and take care of her as much as possible, keep the house tidy, laundry, do my share. I always do my share, but super dad,
okay.
But like just saying, don't worry about those things in life that we have to do in the day-to-day burden. I've got it. I'll take care of it. Don't worry. So that was how I was saying that, work that we typically share, I was doing my part to make sure you focus on what you have to focus in on. I'll focus in on our family.
Marwah's not running in the next election. She stated that a while ago. Yourself, you're going to keep on fighting the fight.
Absolutely. If our next leader wants me to run again, I'd be happy. It's an absolute privilege to represent the people of Jacques-Cartier. It's a privilege to go to the National Assembly and sit in that seat that belongs to the people of my riding. And if I could get to do that for another mandate, I would be very happy to do so. There's so much going on in Quebec right now. And I believe the Liberals still offer an opportunity for change and to really bring in a party that's main focus is cost of living, the economy, the healthcare system, preparing the education system, higher education too. You go down the list, and those have always been the Liberal priorities that have brought Quebecers of all walks of life and all backgrounds together across this province to try and put this province on the right track and building a brighter future for all.
And with respect to your own constituents, and now you mentioned this as well, that's been a big part of you saying, you know what, they're behind me. You're talking about going to the grocery store locally, right? And bumping into people.
Yep, no, absolutely. And, I live in my riding, so no matter what, you always go somewhere and people stop to talk to you and in the best of times. And these moments, the kindness, though, from my constituents, from people we see in the community was great. And people would I had a food drive right before the holidays to support the food bank in the West Island. And it was at a local coffee shop. And people came out to, see us, to give a donation, but also pass a message and say, Greg, we're thinking of you. Keep up the good work. So that meant a lot to me, too, is that people were very, very supportive.
I know you bristle at the fact that your competitors, the other party, sometimes say that the Liberals take the Anglos for granted. I don't think anybody can accuse you of taking your people for granted. You're out there all the time. But your reaction to that kind of comment in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's been around that critique of the Liberals. We take the English-speaking community for granted, and we really try hard not to. I mean, in my view, I don't take anyone for granted. Yes, Jacques-Cartier has been Liberal since Neil Cameron went with the Equality Party way back when.
Right.
But you can't treat it like it's for granted. You got to go out there and earn people's respect, because that's how democracy works. I'm there to represent them, there to be out on the ground as much as possible. And that's how you take people not for granted. And I understand that the Liberals have been perfect with the English-speaking community on all policy issues. No. But I also know, too, in the past, when Liberals are governing, you have English-speaking people around the cabinet table who are there from the community, and not just a file that is responsible for English-speaking Quebecers. But I mean, take the example of my dad. He was, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs for a long time. Someone like Yolande James, who, if my memory serves correct, was Minister for Family for a long time. I mean, they're not nothing profiles either. So when I look at it too, the CAQ and the Parti Québécois, they don't even care to run someone in my riding. Like, it's literally, I've never seen the PQ candidate in my life in Jacques-Cartier. But the Liberal Party, in an area that is super péquiste, we at least try to find somebody from the community who does a serious campaign, who will go to the local debates and be there, because we don't take anyone for granted. We have the objective of winning in 125 seats, where there are other political parties that literally will just write off certain areas of Quebec because they're English, there's too many English, or there's too many people of, from cultural communities, like they just, whatever, that's not our clientele. And again, that's what always brought me to the Liberal Party, is that's not how we view Quebecers, is try to split people up. Everyone is a Quebecer, and we do our best to represent everyone at the National Assembly, and it's not always an easy balance, but the effort is there for sure.
I want to just ask about your dad, because you're in a bit of a unique position. Bill brought this up at the outset. Your dad was a politician, sir, for many, many years, highly respected. When you were going through all this, what did your dad say? What did your dad tell you or suggest?
Well, he was he's one of my best friends, and he just did what a best friend does, that I would go over and we would talk about everything but that. We're not going to talk about that, Greg. Just kind of, how did the Habs do last night? And he would make sure to text me quite a bit during Habs games, like, you're watching how Cole Caulfield's doing. So that was actually what I really needed. And my mom too, same thing, who's the chair of Lester B. Pearson School Board. So she too was like, they know we were going through something super difficult, but they knew that maybe talking about something else would just be good for me as their son. Change the channel. My uncle David, who lives in Toronto, came to Montreal. He was here for 2 days, quick in and out. And he's like, Greg, just come by the house. My parents' house to have a cup of coffee. And that's the same thing he said. The first thing he said, Greg, we're not going to talk about what you're going through. We're going to talk about everything else. He told me about a trip he was going on over the holidays to New Zealand and Australia. And those moments actually were crucial for me, because it was nice to just not talk about what we were going through. Yeah.
I would ask if I can just for a minute shift to something politically. We were talking earlier before we started. With respect to the CAQ, the polls have been bad. They've been bad for a while. The premier resigns. Now we seem to have Bernard Drinville, Christine Fourchette, really at loggerheads with each other, which is a bit surprising, I guess, maybe not.
All about the third link.
And I have Bernard Drinville, who came out, I guess a week or so ago, after he first decided to run, and said, we need to have a dialogue with Anglo-Quebecers. And I'm trying to understand what that means, or how you interpret that.
That's a very good question, because there's been dialogue with the CAQ between the community and the government. They had the Secretariat, Christopher Skeet, if I'm not mistaken, is now the minister again. Before it was Eric Girard. It still exists, but it's, we're having a conversation, but I'm not really listening to. It's kind of like, that's kind of, I think, how the community probably feels, is that if we look at the succession of different bills, there has not been much compromise. And I'll just go back to the school board issue. I think this is the one that never made any sense to me. Because, okay, on the Francophone side, and our party said that we would prefer just to have school boards across the line. But I know that in the Francophone community, there wasn't as a large of an attachment to their school boards, where to the English-speaking community, it's not just a question of our constitutional rights, but they're important institutions here in the city of Montreal, but particularly in the regions. That's where the community congregates to a certain extent. So I never understood. After, the first round of court challenges, where the Superior Court said, the government's out of line. Well, at that point, it had been a couple of years that we had basically had an asymmetrical system working. The Francophones had their centre de service, we had our school boards. And everything is going, fine, in the sense there's a lot of issues in our education system, but that system of governance has continued to work perfectly fine, and the government could easily just said, we're just going to leave it as is. English-speaking community has their school boards, their centre de service, they're already there, they're set up, and we'll just continue going down that path. So no matter how many times we had people from this community make those points, it was like the desire to have to go to Ottawa to continue this kind of constitutional confrontation. And the CAQ, on more occasions than not, has tried to pick fights with Ottawa, with the constitutional structure, with the framework that exists for their own political causes, and that's a bit disappointing. I will give Bernard Drainville a little bit of credit in the sense that when he was education minister, his second bill to kind of reform les centres de services scolaires, he did listen to my wife at the time, who was the education critic, saying, look, you haven't even solved the legal challenges from your first bill. Maybe in your second one, you should put a pause on anything that impacts the English-speaking community until that can be resolved. And at that point in time, he did listen. He saw the logic in that, well, the community is not keen with this bill. Maybe we should wait a little bit longer. So I'll give him that. You can ask him about maybe that's the type of dialogue he would like to present more often to Quebecers. And on the other hand, for Madame Fréchette, I've never really heard her speak about the English-speaking community, so I don't know where she personally sits on any of these issues.
She wants a dialogue, she says,
but
you call and you don't get a response.
Exactly. You don't get a response, but one way or another, I think we just need to change the station on the CAC and find a new government. That's fine.
One of the criticisms against this Liberal government now provincially, and I understand it because you're kind of in transition, right? You don't officially have a leader.
Yeah.
But, Marc Tanguay is still in the House, basically doing what Marwah should have been doing. But regardless, and a lot of people are wondering, how come for everything that's going on right now with respect to the government, we don't hear much from the Liberals? I mean, I know we heard something the other day. There was an issue. Andre Fortin, I guess, got up and complained about something in this whole third line and whatever. But is that fair criticism, do you think, for this party? Kind of rudderless now, in a sense, not standing up?
I would say, obviously, my colleagues in the party went through a very difficult period of time, and I thought we were doing extremely well on Bill 2. Andre Fortin was our health care critic beforehand, doing really good work. And at least this week, you did hear again from Andre Fortin. We were getting back into our groove, and he clearly stood up, made those points on the third link, also on the new healthcare bill that's coming out from the CAC, to repair the terrible damage they did with Bill 2 to the healthcare system, and sort of said, okay, fine, we'll help you resolve this. But at the same time, this bill, it's like the fifth bill from the CAC, and there's nothing to help improve the lives of patients. And that's kind of getting a bit frustrating. So, I felt he was present on that issue. I know that there's been a line of interviews this week in English-speaking media from my colleague Desiree McGraw on the situation in NDG with the power outages. There's a few other interviews I saw lined up, one on CTV. So we're trying to be more present in the press in the English-speaking community. And I think we will obviously be successful on that point. And one thing that definitely does help us is that once we get back into the parliamentary routine, the convergence between politicians and the press, the fact that you have all the different networks in the English-speaking community are there at the National Assembly reporting on the stories of the day will help us have more opportunities to maximize our visibility.
There was a point where the Liberals were only a few points behind the PQ. Then it all got muddled now, and then Legault resigned. How confident are you that the Liberals can be a force in the next election?
I'm very confident. And last poll, we don't look at polls, all politicians say. We focus on the only poll that matters, election day. But if you look at the last poll, we bounced back up. We're in second place. Again, I think we are the option for Quebecers who are seeking change, but also for a party that is truly looking to focus on their main priorities. And I know this is just the slogans, but it's true. People care about the cost of living right now. They care about the economy. They care about the healthcare network. They care about managing public finances. They care about, having a little bit maybe more stability and harmony in society, that we're focusing on those priorities, on housing, and not necessarily always on other issues. And that's what our party has always done.
Right.
And a lot of the time we end up getting caught, the Liberals, when we have to go govern, after it's been a PQ government for a long time, reordering the House and putting things back on track. So that's what I think we are going to offer, and I'm very confident we're going to provide that option.
The elephant in the room, though, is something, a referendum, if PQ promises to hold. Like, you haven't talked about it, and we had Monsieur Milliard on last week, and he doesn't want that to be the issue that everybody's talking about for the Liberals, but nonetheless, being from the West Island, it's very sensitive, certainly, to your constituents.
Yeah, no, for sure. The Liberals never come to the forefront offering referendums to the population, right? That's not our stick. And of course, in the PQ, talk about it, and they're doing well in the polls, potentially in a position to govern if an election was held today. It's a possibility. They're going to talk about a referendum. And then, of course, we have to be prepared to speak about a referendum and put ourselves on that footing. But even in then, I have never had an issue, even with the CAC, who I don't find maximize our opportunities to work with our partners in the Federation. I have no problem that the Liberal Party of Quebec can stand up to Ottawa when provincial issues matter on healthcare, on certain transfers. We can do that, but at the same time, our biggest trading partners still remains Ontario. We have neighbors in New Brunswick, bilingual, who like doing business with Quebec. Energy deal we're trying to build with Labrador and Newfoundland and Labrador. We still do business too with other provinces, and that is something where Liberals have always wanted to be engaged in the Federation. And I truly believe Canada is at its strongest when Quebec is at its strongest. And being a full participant in the Federation is a good thing, talking about best practices. How can we work together to counter a threat from the United States of America in Donald Trump? How can we work better with European allies to find new markets? That is always done best when you work with your neighbors. And no matter what, if the Parti Québécois ever won a referendum, well, Ontario is still your neighbor. You're still going to have some type of federative structure to deal with your neighbors, right? You're still going to have agreements with them, and it's impossible to imagine just overnight they become a silo. It's just not true. You're going to have to deal with your neighbors. So why go through a messy divorce? Because at the end of the day, that's what separation is. When you look at it, how are we going to divide all the assets and debts of the Federation between Quebec and you get into those types of questions, and it would take an extremely long time. And I think most Quebecers say, and I don't underestimate, and I always try to keep in mind, there's about 30% of the population in Quebec that do not want to be in Canada. It's not easy for them that they always have to live that way, right? So you have to keep in mind that defending their interests sometimes too in the Federation is super important. But the idea just to take us completely out and everything will be a lot better, I don't believe it, and I don't think it's in the best interest of all Quebecers, particularly as geopolitics have shifted so rapidly in the last couple of years. In the end of the day, we're best working together with our neighbors and with our allies at this point in time in our history.
So you're not buying the part where Paul St. Pierre Plamondon, who we've had on the podcast, said, if and when we separate, eventually we'll have our own Quebec dollar, we'll have our own Quebec army.
Passport.
I believe he actually said the quote is, we'll be a rich country.
I'll put it this way. I think Quebec will always be a rich country in the sense we have so much talent here. We have so many natural resources that we can exploit. We have, great universities. So I believe in our people. I believe that we're strong people. But at the same time, this idea that our independent Quebec would just magically resolve all of our challenges is not true. We do, of course, through equalization and from transfer system, we get redistribution of money from Ottawa to fund our healthcare system, to fund our education system, to fund our daycare system. That's just true, and that is a division of the richness of the entire country. And Quebec does benefit from that, and we pay into the system too, but we do get, I think the last shipped number I saw was, $14-15 billion net that we get from the Canadian Federation. That's sizable amounts of money. So, I believe in the people of Quebec, but I also believe that we are best suited within the Federation, and it remains a good deal. But I'm going to speak to the English-speaking community too, and to the rest of Canada. We have our linguistic debates here, but sometimes I ask, what are the other provinces doing to take care of their francophone minorities? It is totally legitimate for francophones in Canada to be annoyed that they can't get services in French from Air Canada from time to time. But the head of a company like Air Canada doesn't speak French and seems not interested in really actually making an effort. As a francophone, that is frustrating, insulting, and that's something that comes from Ottawa. It's it's a federal corporation and all that. So never lose sight of those things too. That sometimes how are we treating the speaking community here? But what is Alberta doing to take care of their francophone minority? What is Saskatchewan doing? And they're very small communities, but part of this federation that we founded in 1867, because we at that point in time did not include our Indigenous communities. It was a pact between Francophone Canadians and you know, French Canadians and English Canada, right? That's how it works. So making sure too at that level, we're listening to what Quebec is saying around its language and around its identity is important, but also not to forget, before people start giving lessons to Quebec about how it's treating its minorities, what are you doing? What are you doing to make this country and its institutions respect the bilingualism acts that we have? So that's kind of like, I think, a balance too. And if we can understand sometimes the frustration that comes from Francophone Quebecers, again, only can strengthen our federation as a whole.
Fair enough. We're going to have to wrap up. Just a couple of things before we go. And if it's not fair, just tell me that's not a fair question. We had Charles Milliard here a couple of weeks ago. He will be the leader of the Provincial Liberal Party, and asked the question about inviting Marwah back to the party. And he actually, I think he said for the first time
He told
here
us, he said
that he had spoken with her, and that's great.
Yeah.
And then the other day, I think Marc Tanguay was asked the same thing, and the answer remains rather nebulous. Like, we'll kind of get to it when we get to it. And I wondered, are you okay? And have you spoken about that with her?
She and, you know, Charles Milliard and the party has made it clear that it will be Charles Milliard who makes the decision. So Marc Tanguay said it's not me.
And he
it will be
appeared
Charles
very
who
confident
decides it.
on this,
And when, you know, we get to that bridge, we'll cross it. I want, you know, Marwah to be reintegrated into the caucus. I told Charles that. He knows it. So we'll take things one day at a time. We're not there yet. Charles still has a few more steps to officially become the leader, and then we'll see, you know, what he does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last thing I will bring up, we were talking about this beforehand. It's Super Bowl weekend. Let's get to the
Real
thing.
topic.
Yeah. All right, so
The real priorities of the people.
tell me who's winning the Super Bowl. Who you taking?
I think the Seahawks are going to win. I think their defense is going to bring them, you know, a championship. But like we talked about beforehand, I think this is the revenge game for the Seahawk, for the Seattle community. Fourth and one. Yeah. They're going to get revenge on the Pats, who, you know, broken-hearted fan base, and that's our last memory of a Super Bowl. So I see the Seahawks coming out as a winner, but they also came through a tough division. So I think they're going to win it.
I think you're putting too much emphasis on Sam Darnold being a New York Jet. I think that's totally wrong.
I think Darnold's been around too long.
And the Seahawks have a formidable defense. I think they'll keep it on the ground. I see them winning.
So it looks like we have 3 Seattle picks here, right?
Oh, I thought you were rooting for...
No, I'm going to take it's 4.5 points, I think. I think they'll cover. I think Seattle wins. I don't think they're going to put up 41 points like they did against the 49ers, but we'll make it unanimous and take Seattle.
As long as Sam Darnold doesn't Sam Darnold, I see the Seahawks winning. All right. Unanimous pick.
Greg, thank you so much for coming on. Really
appreciate
it. Wish you all the best.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
And thanks again for watching The Corner Booth. We'll see you again soon.